Hello, everybody. I'm Rick Torseth. I live out in Seattle, Washington, on the West Coast of the United States. I am a leadership coach and consultant. For about the last 15 years, I've been doing work in this area with NGOs, not-for-profits, and large healthcare systems. I spent about 11 years working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That time is spent working with leaders has helped me understand some of the challenges that leaders face when they're dealing with complex social wicked problems like climate change. So what I want to do today in the time I have is share with you 4 leadership distinctions that I think are critical for anybody who's choosing to lead in this environment. So let me begin with the distinctions. The first is the difference between leading and authority. We have made this confusion for about 100 years. Authority is a function that happens in organizations around order, protection, and direction. It's a function that we need in an organization, and it's usually dependent on who is positioned where in the organizational chart. Leading, on the other hand, is an activity and a choice. It's an action. It can come from anywhere in the system, anywhere in the organization. The organizational chart is not necessarily a map of leading. It is more of a map of authority. Therefore, most all social change movements that we've seen in the world have come from the fringes. They rarely come from the top. And we are living right now in a time when we have 2 really great cases that we can look at that helps us understand this distinction between leading and authority. One of them we're all familiar with, Greta Thunberg from Sweden. Most everybody in the climate change movement knows Greta. 15 years old, she skipped school, stood out in front, put a stake in the ground and said, I am working for climate change. And 2 years later, she's been nominated for the Nobel Prize twice, Time Magazine Person of the Year, and she has 0 authority to be creating the movement that she's led. A more dangerous example is Joshua Wong in Hong Kong, who for about the last 7 years has been leading a movement to maintain freedoms in Hong Kong against mainland China. This has been a dangerous body of work for Joshua. He's ended up in jail a few times, been released. He persists, and as we well know, he has no authority with the Chinese government to be doing this, but yet the movement carries on, and Joshua is unrelenting in his pursuit of freedom in Hong Kong. So those are 2 good examples of what it means to lead versus having the authority to lead or not lead. The second distinction I want to make is one of problem definition. The biggest mistake that leaders make in addressing problems is misdiagnosing the nature of it. Now, there's a certain logic to that, which is to say we're all rewarded and recognized in our career for having solutions to problems. That's how we elevate our career. It's how we're rewarded. It's how we're recognized. But when you're dealing with complex, wicked, messy problems, they tend to be immune to quick fix answers. Tame and technical problems are pretty straightforward. They usually are operating in our logic system. They come in our experience, and we know something about them, and we've usually seen them before. So generally speaking, when we're addressing a tame problem, it's really not a leadership issue. It's more of a management issue. We know what to do. Let's get on with it, and let's get it fixed. Now, wicked, messy problems like climate change don't live in our logic system. They live in our hearts. They live in our guts. They affect our values, they challenge our ethics, and almost without exception, a wicked, messy problem is going to involve loss. Climate change is going to involve loss for all of us in some way, shape, or form, some kind of shared sacrifice. And it's that challenge that formulates the work. Now, the third distinction then comes into play. And that distinction is, how do we mobilize a movement to address these issues that we're trying to deal with in our society? The basic currency of leading is getting and holding people's attention so you can get them into a position to do the work. Now, getting people's attention is really quite easy. Holding their attention over a period of time is a whole different proposition. So when we start a movement, we generally begin with our friends and allies. They believe in what we're doing. That means that they come fairly cheap and fairly easy. We still need to hold them in the process over the length of time. We need to take care of them. But as a general rule, friends and allies are not enough to constitute the movement we need to create the social change. The people we need are the people who stand in opposition to our movement, at least at the outset. They have the most to lose by making some shift in what they're doing and giving some of their time and energy to our cause. And so therefore, what that means for us, if we're going to move them from where they stand in their position on this continuum over to our side of the conversation, we're going to need to spend a serious amount of time in their kitchen understanding their reasons and their concerns and the things that they need from this proposition. So therefore, the work of leading is to help people understand that they must do the hard work that they know has to happen, but are disinclined to do. We're sitting here living in the times of COVID, and for whatever extent our leaders have been effective in helping us navigate this pandemic, what they've asked us to do time and time again is things like social distancing, wear masks, endure lockdowns. Those are things that we inherently want to resist. Their challenge is to keep us in a holding space where we can do that long enough to be effective and help reduce the consequences of the pandemic. People understand the logic of what you're asking them, but they're just not too keen about your idea right now, because what they understand is there's loss looming for them, and they haven't had that reconciled. So that takes us now to the fourth distinction, and that is loss. It's a myth that people resist change. We don't resist change. All of you have experiences in your life where you've willingly changed some aspect of your behavior because the upside of making that change was greater than staying the way you were. Nobody gives back the lottery ticket. Nobody wants to give up the benefits that accrue to them for winning that ticket. What they're concerned about is loss. And what does loss mean in a setting like this? Well, for people who you're trying to move to your movement, they're concerned about their loss of competency. They're concerned about their loss of identity, status, how they're rewarded, how they're recognized. Their expertise, will it still be valued? Some degree of knowledge of the future. During COVID, the biggest loss we are all experiencing is the loss of freedom, our ability to move around, our ability to associate with people in close quarters, travel, gather with friends and families. We're entering the holidays now, and there's some serious loss still coming for us because we know that we're not going to be able to be in those family traditions that we're accustomed to during the pandemic. We're clear that there's now some looming mental health issues for lots of people due to this, and that consequence is real. And so leaders, as leaders dealing with climate change or COVID, whatever the case may be, we must be great. I mean, not just good, we have to be great at understanding and appreciating the loss that these people are enduring, that they need to absorb in order to get into this movement and make the change. And by great, I mean, we have to be able to understand what their concerns are, what they're experiencing, what their fears are. And then we need to be able to take that information and put it in a context that creates a perception and a reality of the value that they will experience if they join our movement. And we need to be able to construct that into narratives that we can tell people in different ways and shapes and forms so that we can keep the heat and the energy of the movement progressing. That is difficult work for leaders because we tend to be quite efficient, and this is slow, methodical, relational work. The craft of storytelling, the craft of listening become essential for leaders as they formulate the responses to the losses that the people that they're trying to work with need to have addressed. And that's craft that we need to work on. So in review, the four distinctions that are important for us to remember are leading versus authority, tame and technical problems versus wicked problems, mobilizing a movement, and dealing with loss. Now then, one of the most important things that leaders need to do, which is to have a feedback loop, a self-reflection loop. So I want to give you a couple of resources or a couple of questions that you can utilize to address your own feedback. One is, what's going on in my organization that's teaching me how to lead? An organization is a pulsing entity. It has culture, it has politics, it has power, it has systems, it has processes. All of those things are producing data that we can use as leaders to understand what our next move is to lead, what it is that the system's asking us to do. So it's important for us to pause on a regular basis, either individually or as a leadership group, and ask ourselves, what's the organization trying to tell us they need from us as leaders? The second one is nobody as a leader arrives at a snowstorm, at your door in a snowstorm, without leaving footprints. And what I mean by that is the question that I think is important to ask is, what's my contribution to the mess I'm trying to solve? I have some hand in it, and to the degree that I'm blind to that, I'm going to continue to keep making that contribution. So it's important to have friends and allies around who know us well enough and can give us some feedback and help us see our blind spots so that we can get back in the game quicker. A couple of personal growth ideas I want to leave with you. Leading can be lonely work. Leaders tend to want to be solo practitioners oftentimes. In the work of dealing with complex, wicked problems like climate change, that's not going to cut it. So you need to find partners. You need to go on this journey together. You need to help each other. By that, I mean you bring your leadership challenges to each other. You ask questions, you listen, you get feedback, you get ideas, you share your experiences, and then you go back in the game. So find partners to work with as leaders that can help you solve your issues and address and listen to you. The second one is relationships are primary. Everything else is derivative. Now, we inherently know this, but that means that all work gets done through relationships. And so taking care of those relationships become essential work for people who are leading. We're talking about being effective over being efficient, which means we're adding time to the work. But you're in this work for the long haul, and if you invest that time in your relationships, it will pay off when it's most needed. And lastly, what I want to say is I want to encourage you to focus on your talents and your potentials in the work that you do, not your oil leaks. All of us understand the deficiencies we have. You can make a case that for years and years you've been working on those, and you continue to work on those. Where the opportunities are is to work on how you can leverage your talents and your potential in pursuit of the work that you're doing as a leader and in pursuit of affecting climate change. That's where the upside is. So encourage yourself, encourage your team, work on your talents and potentials, and locate that inside the work that you're doing. Because at the end of the day, the world needs your best version of yourself in order to come to work every day and have the impacts that we need to have in climate change. I appreciate the fact that you're spending your entire career in this area. The world appreciates it. Thank you very much. And thanks for having me in REN21's Academy.